We're ready to roll, I think.
I think we are. I think we currently have 32 attendees, so I think we can get the ball rolling here.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Somerset County Office of Youth Services October Community Connections Workshop. Our topic today is the journey to pride, and our presenters will be exploring attitudinal beliefs around sexual minority youth and how they impact our ability to support these youth in their development. We have three speakers today. The first one's going to be Gary Paul Wright, who is the founder and executive director of the African American Office of Gay Concerns. He is extremely active within the LGBTQ plus community in Newark. Our second presenter is going to be Reginald Rosarion, who is the director of organizational development for Tri-County Care Management Organization here in Somerset County. And he's tasked with identifying, assessing, and implementing processes and projects that promote the overall health and growth of the organization. Later on at 11:30, we will be joined by Dr. Diane Finkel, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Medicine and the director of the Infectious Disease Fellowship Program at Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School. And she is passionately committed to improving health disparities in marginalized populations and has coordinated the community care for diverse populations at risk, including immigration detainees, LGBTQ plus marginally housed youth, and persons who use drugs. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. As a reminder, just to receive full credit for this webinar, you will have to attend it in full. In addition to that, I will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A for any questions that will be asked. Right after each presenter is done with their slideshow, we will have time for questions, but also do not be afraid to post any questions, and maybe if we do have time during the presentation, they will get to them. So I'm going to let them get started. Gary, if you want to start.
Okie dokie. All right. Good morning, everybody. I am Gary Paul Wright, and I am one of the founders of the African American Office of Gay Concerns, and I'm the executive director, and I'm so glad that you guys joined us today. I'm going to try to share my screen. Okay, here we go. All right, y'all can see that? Okay. We good? All right. So the title of this is Working with LGBTQ plus Youth. Let me give you a little background. Well, actually, I'll go ahead and start. Here we go. These are the objectives of today. And as you can see, today we'll be learning how to tuck. That's just a joke. We're going to be providing a brief agency background for facilitating today's discussion. Define sexual orientation and gender identity, otherwise known as SOGI. We're going to examine LGBTQIA plus terminology, and we're going to provide relevant facts focusing on transgender and gender nonconforming issues. And then we're going to share a couple of best practices that we found out that works for us. So, as I stated, these are the 8 guys who actually helped us start the AAOGC, the African Office of Gay Concerns. This was actually held in our kitchen. That's me sitting down front with the long hair. I had dreadlocks way back then, but this work has caused me to lose all my hair. So that goes with the territory, okay? And that little white guy sitting there in the middle, that's my husband, Peter. We've been together 32 years. And he's been very instrumental in keeping me sane and keeping the organization on track, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So much kudos to him. But basically in the year 2000, I was working with the AIDS Education and Training Center when it was over at UMDNJ, University of Medicine and Dentistry, before the Rutgers thing. And we just kind of noticed that there wasn't a whole lot going on in Newark addressing specifically gay Black men. There were organizations around like Hyacinth and NJCRI, but they were doing, general outreach to people, the community. So we decided that we needed to do some special outreach to gay Black men because mainly they were driving the epidemic. So we needed to address that. So in March 15th, 2000, and oh, I suppose I put 2002 on there, we opened our doors in downtown Newark, and then we've been there ever since. 20 years, so we're very happy that we're still around. Our original mission was to provide HIV/AIDS prevention services to gay men of color, and we've got our 501c3, and we got the state of New Jersey Department of Health found out about us or heard about us somehow. I don't know how, but they approached us and said, listen, if you guys go ahead and do this and do that and jump through these hoops, you know, so we asked them, how high did you want us to jump? And we did, and they fund us, and they continue to fund us. Now, a few years later, in 2004, we received a few leftover dollars from the Department of Health, in which we were able to start our transgender peer advocacy project, which we called TGIF. Thank goodness I'm fabulous. And we produced our first transgender forum. We called it Mascara, but I'll talk about that in a minute. Excuse me. I do apologize. I'm getting over COVID. I've been out for this entire week, so bear with me. About a dozen young male to female, or M to F, trans women of color attended the event, which eventually led to forums to be held annually in subsequent years. In fact, right now we're getting ready for our presentation of Mascara. It's going to be our 14th year doing this, so anybody's invited to come to it if you can, and we'll have more information on that later. So this is what happened. We created a group called Sister T because there were no interventions for trans women at that time. The only intervention that the state had approved of, which was in the CDC's compendium of interventions, was Sister. So we decided to take that. We got some additional funding for technical assistance, and so we adapted it to fit the needs of transgender women of color. So it's peer-led by trans women of color. And we tried to do outreach so that we could get, you know, those who were in Newark who would attend, and sure enough, you know, they started coming, and it was like, okay, this is great. So we continued it, and as you can see, what we did, we started a group called the Ginger Girls. Now, the Ginger Girls were based on Ginger Grant from Gilligan's Island, those of you who are old enough to remember Gilligan's Island. And all the girls were in lab coats and glasses and things like that. And they formed kind of an edutainment troupe. And we found out that was a really fun way to disseminate information about HIV and AIDS, and educating and entertaining at the same time. Now, we did get in trouble at one event. We did a World AIDS Day event at City Hall in East Orange, and my girls came out, and they had a little chant that they called the Ginger Girl chant, and they did a condom demonstration right there in the City Hall, and the mayor was not happy about it. In fact, he didn't speak to me for about 3 years after that. But everybody in the audience really enjoyed it and thought it was something new and something different. So, you know, in whatever you do, don't be afraid to try some new stuff. Think outside the box and have fun with it. And especially if you're dealing with young people, they like to have fun, and they also like to create. So, you know, make time for them and listen to them. Keep your ears open. Then in 2009, we had some additional funds from the Department of Health, New Jersey Department of Health. And we came up with the Status is Everything campaign. It was a testing campaign. And we were really, really excited that they trusted us with this money to do this. So Cory Booker was our mayor at the time, and we enlisted his help in City Hall, and we launched it at City Hall in Newark. And basically, the goal was to increase awareness and access to culturally sensitive HIV testing and STI screening services in the greater Newark area. The task was to create a social marketing campaign to include modern day technology, And that was like including the internet and text messages, and we put videos, we had YouTube videos. Then the images used needed to have a local feel, so we actually used the models from Newark. These were trans and gay men models, and we had them on sides of buses. We had 2 billboards in the city of Newark, and we were all over the place. And it was such a thrill to be driving to work, and you're driving behind a bus, and there's your ad on this bus. It was really, really an exciting time. So much so that we entered the campaign in submitted it to the World, the AIDS conference, the International AIDS Conference in 2012. I'm sorry, 2010, and we were accepted, and I got to go to Vienna and present this poster that you see on your left-hand side. And it was really, really fantastic, and it was fabulous, and I had a great time. The only thing about it is the state said, sure, you can go and do this, but you got to pay your own way. So Peter and I actually paid our way to go to Vienna and present this, but they took all the credit for it. But it was wonderful. And just to be on an international stage and to present what we're doing in Newark, to the world was just, it was just, I'll never have that feeling again. So it was great. So, and like I said, we had to deal with partners who were local and the local health departments and things like that. So we had a great time. Moving on, one of the things that we also discovered is that Newark had a very nice culture scene when it comes to the house culture and the ballroom scene. Now, houses, I don't know if those of you who know anything about houses and ballroom scene, but if you've watched the shows Pose this year or Legendary, those were based on the ballroom scene. And members of the ballroom scene are members of houses. Now, the houses are a subculture of gay population where members in drag would perform and compete against each other. They're LGBT people who care about each other and help one another when needed. Members of the houses come from broken homes, many of them, where they do not receive support or encouragement for their sexual identity. A house is created in a family structure. There's a mother, I'm sorry, that says a other, but that should be a mother and a father of any gender, and members of the houses are called the children. Houses are named usually derived from the names of fashion designers or names of founding members like La Perla, Extravaganza. I'm sure you've heard of the House of Extravaganza, Milan, Escada, Armani, and Bolonic, and that's just to name the few. And this is where the voguing came from. Okay, I know a lot of people think Madonna was like the be all for voguing because of her big hit Vogue. But basically, she stole that from the children. And a lot of the people that were in her videos were members of the houses. And what they would do is they would have runway categories and they would compete for prizes. And sometimes they would compete for money. Over time, the ballroom scene has emerged. And there's even a subgroup of the subgroup called the Kiki scene or the Kiki houses. And the Kiki houses generally tend to have younger members between adolescents and high school age and in the very early 20s, as opposed to the big houses, which are, you could be as old as you want to in the big houses. But we did our first Kiki function this past summer. And we called it the tag team ball, and every category had 2 contestants, prize winners, and that's why we called it tag team. But it was very fun. Took a lot of work, but the kids had a great time, and so now we're legendary for throwing balls in Newark. Now let's talk about some social determinants that we discovered with our kids. Discrimination, criminalization of same gender loving people, mental health, HIV/AIDS phobia, employment, homophobia, incarceration, bullying, stigma, heterosexism, transphobia, racism, and housing and homelessness. These were all the things that the young people that were coming into our office were dealing with. and we weren't sure how to deal with it at first. But like I said, we listened to them to find out what they needed, and we tried to meet those needs. So we established condom distribution. We did individual level interventions and group level interventions. And we basically had and we had a community community advisory board made of young people. And they're the ones that actually kind of helped us guide our office into what we were doing. Once again, we were very, very happy that they were participating in such a manner. Now, when we talk about gay men, when we first started, this is, there were stereotypes that we had to deal with. All gay men were homo thugs, they were punk sissies, dope smoking drug dealers, hustlers, and sex workers. Or they were on the down low, which we'll talk about in a minute. They were jailbait, gay for the stay, and age carriers. So this is what we had to deal with, and we had to try to disallow for transgender women. Stereotypes, they were all prostitutes and sex workers, drag queens, house children, homeless, cross-dressers, freaks, chicks with dicks, runaways, and throwaways. And then you got the Q, and the Q was for questioning, the Q in the LGBTQ. So many members of our focused population were questioning their own gender as well as their sexual identity. However, they tended to adopt the examples set by their peers. What that means is, if you were a young gay person and you were just coming out, it depended on the people that you hung out with. If you hung out with a bunch of people who, were drag queens, they tended to wanted to be drag queens along with their peers. If they were just lesbian or gay, they tended to do that. But we put this poster up in our office, the Bionic Woman, and that's when we first really started seeing trans people come out in Newark. Now, everything that's on this poster was nose job, chin augmentation, things like that. These are just, and this was like in late 80s, or this is like in the 90s. This poster came out in the 90s. And the model just happens to be somebody by the name of Jordan, and she's very sweet and very nice. And she actually has not had any of these surgeries. She's just naturally beautiful, naturally feminine, and she is trans, but she just uses her natural body to be beautiful. And but these are just some of the things that people had to pay just to show you that turning into a female was not cheap. Okay, it's very, very expensive. That's why a lot of the girls had to turn to sex work, because they had to pay for their own surgeries and their own bodies. They didn't have Medicare or Medicaid to help them with these things. So, and we were there to help guide them. But the bottom line is, they would come in and they would look at this poster and they go, okay, this is a cool place. And soon they began coming into our office with little bags, and they would go into the bathroom and put on their wigs and their Daisy Dukes and, come out, and, it's like, whoa, all of a sudden you're a woman. And all of a sudden, you had a new name, you had a new identity and things like that. And then they'd go downtown and, terrorize downtown Newark. I say that lovingly. And then come back, and they would change clothes back into their boy clothes and, go home. So this kind of went on for a while. And this is when we discovered, what's good for gay men is not necessarily the same for trans women or trans men. We didn't actually have any trans men at the time, but we do now. So we again had to, do our outreach a little differently. We tried to do some outreach at night. We tried to do some outreach at Penn Station in Newark. And our workers were chased out of Penn Station because we had one trans and one gay man. And the police kind of chased them out, saying that they were, sex workers, just because they were handing out condoms and things like that. So You got to be careful when you go to some of these public places, because the authorities will come after you. They just, really didn't believe in prevention and outreach. So we had to kind of curtail that effort for a little while. Then, we started having focus groups with some of our kids, and our transgender participants reported experiencing family and peer rejection, inadequate and unstable housing, legal problems, incarceration, lack of financial support, harassment and violence, childhood physical abuse, and those involved with sex work were at increased risk of sexual assault, and they were at heightened risk for HIV and poor health outcomes. And as you see, that's the first time that a transgender woman was on the cover of Time magazine, which is why I included that. Now, when we talk about LGBT youth, not just trans, but all LGBT youth, they reported a lot of bullying, family rejection, homelessness, violence against queer and trans people, racial justice or injustice, health outcomes, not good outcomes, economic justice, mental health, and suicide. Then we talk about SOGI. I talked about that earlier, sexual orientation and gender identity. And you got to be careful not to confuse these, okay? Because they are different, and you'll see in a couple of next slides. Sexual orientation is an internal or enduring emotional, romantic, or sexual attraction to other people. And this includes heterosexual or straight, gay, lesbian, bisexual, or even pansexual. Gender identity, on the other hand, is one's innermost concept of yourself as male, female, a blend of both, or neither. And it is how individuals perceive themselves and what they call themselves. And we'll go into that in a second. So why is the interest in SOGI? Because LGBT youth are 2 to 3 times more likely to attempt suicide and more likely to be homeless. And it's estimated that between 20% and 40% of all homeless youth are LGBTQ. LGBT youth are also at higher risk for becoming infected with HIV and other sexually transmitted diseases, and they are also more likely to be bullied. LGBT populations are much more likely to smoke than others. They also have higher rates of alcohol use, other drug use, depression, and anxiety. And elderly LGBT individuals face additional barriers to health care because of isolation, diminished family support, reduced availability to social services, and some report discrimination from their peers even when they're living in communal elderly housing. Trans youth individuals experience a high prevalency of HIV and STDs, victimization, and suicide attempts. They're also less likely to have health insurance than heterosexual or gay and lesbian individuals due to rejection by their families or discrimination when seeking employment. Lesbians are less likely to get preventative services for cancer, such as mammograms and Pap tests. And gay men and other men who have sex with men, or MSMs, are at higher risk for HIV and STDs, especially within communities of color. And bisexuals, which we rarely talk about, have higher rates of behavioral health issues compared to lesbians and gay men. Now, speaking of sex, we can talk about your biological sex, your sexual orientation, or your sexual behavior. So biological sex is defined as the determination of an individual's sex based on chromosome structure, hormones, and genitalia. And your biological sex is assigned at birth because when you're born, you're either they're going to put on your birth certificate either a male or a female, and nothing in between. But that's the doctor's choice what they put on your certificate. Sexual orientation is an individual's erotic attraction to others of the same, opposite, or both genders. And sexual behavior is what an individual does sexually and with whom. Now let's define gender. You've got your gender identity, your gender expression, and your gender roles. And as we said earlier, gender identity is a person's inner sense of their gender. A person may think of themselves as male or as female, or a combination of both, or as another gender, such as non-binary or non-conforming. Gender expression is the way in which one communicates with his or her gender identity or their gender identity through appearance and behavior. And gender role is the part of the behavior that is influenced by the expectations of society of what is gender appropriate. Everybody with me so far? Any questions? Because I don't have the chat on my screen. So if there's any questions, y'all interrupt me and let me know what's on your mind. Now, this is a gingerbread person, and you're going to see this often if you haven't seen it before. And I've seen it in various iterations, like there's the unicorn, the gender unicorn, things like that. So basically, this is just a chart to kind of show you what's the difference between gender identity, expression, biological sex, and sexual orientation. So when we talk about gender identity, on one hand, you've got women or woman, and on the other hand, you have a man. And in between, you've got your gender queer. So this is like, where on this spectrum, do you belong? Are you a Barbie, which is the ultimate woman? Or are you a G.I. Joe, which is the ultimate man? So people can lie anywhere on this spectrum, and it's up to them where they fall. You can't define for them. They need to define for themselves. Gender expression, you either dress like a woman, or you dress like a man, or you dress like either or both, which is androgynous. You don't know what the hell this person is supposed to be. And it's, if you want to find out, just ask them. But gender, I'm a guy, I'm a male, I dress as a male. So, I'm cisgender because I look like what I'm supposed to look like according to society. Don't get confused. A lot of people are androgynous only because it's easier for them to get through life that way. For instance, like David Bowie, if you're of a certain age, when he first came out, people didn't know whether he was gay, straight, queer, what, because he was androgynous. He just wore what he wanted to wear, and people decided, whatever they thought he was, he didn't care. Now, when we talk about biological sex, you could be female, or you could be intersexed, or you could be male. Now, biological sex refers to the objectivity measurable organs, hormones, or chromosomes. For instance, female equals vagina and ovaries, 2 X chromosomes. Male has a penis, testicles, and XY chromosomes. And intersex is a combination of the two. And then you've got your sexual orientation. You're either heterosexual, homosexual, or it's somewhere in between, which is bisexual, or you can be omnisexual or pansexual, which means, you don't care who you sleep with, as long as you get your rocks off. Now, personal gender pronouns. Now, a lot of times people say your preferred gender pronouns, but it's not. It's your personal gender pronouns. So don't assume someone's gender or which pronouns they prefer. And if you're not sure, just ask the person's name or respectfully ask what pronouns they want to go by. Don't ask someone what their real or legal name is or dead name is. And the term dead name came from trans themselves. That was a term that was new to me when I started this work. But don't use person's dead name, except where law enforcement is involved. And a person's personal gender pronoun can change. And if you're not sure which pronoun a person is using, always appropriate to ask. We actually had a staff person who went by the name of Kira, and Kira sometimes would come in dressed as a woman, and sometimes he would come dressed as a boy. And we would have to ask him, who are you today? What do you want to be called today? So he was very, very fluid. And he actually had 2 separate Facebook pages. One was for his male persona, and one was for his her female persona. So it can get tricky. And even now today, I get, I don't always get it right. Sometimes I mistake somebody who's going by non-conforming or non-binary, and I mistakenly call them a she or a he, and they correct me. So don't be afraid to ask. It's a lot easier, and you can always apologize. I'm sorry I got that wrong, but let me know what I'm supposed to call you, and I will call you that. Now, just keep in mind that one size does not fit all. You could be Black, you could go by he, she, hers, you could be gender diverse, you could be butch, or you can be femme, you could go by Latinx if you want to. There are trans women, trans men, pronouns they, them, theirs. There are white and they're Black and the gender nonconforming, and there are trans men who sleep with men, or who sleep with trans women, or who sleep with men who have sex with men. So, I mean, it could get very, very confusing. And I actually have another chart that I didn't include in this slide because of timing, that basically shows, who's sleeping with whom, and if you throw straight people in the mix, gay people in the mix, or trans people in the mix, the configurations are like really endless. So it can be very, very confusing. Okay, which leads us to intersectionality. And what intersectionality describes is the overlapping or intersecting social identities and related systems of oppression, domination, or discrimination. Those of us who are proponents of intersectionality hold that unless service providers take intersectionality into account, they will be of less use and may in fact be detrimental for various segments of the population. And here's some of the things that intersect, okay? Let me get this screen over here. Okay, so you could be, your gender and your mental disability, or your age could be a factor. Your race is a factor, social class, ethnicity, nationality, your sexual orientation, or your religion. And these could cross-reference with your age, mental disability, physical disability, mental illness, physical illness, or other forms of identity. So this means that, we are not all monolithic. Every person in this on this call or on this Zoom, you have some of any of these or all of these, you know what I mean? So, you can't judge somebody based on gender alone or race alone or physical disability or illnesses alone. You have to take all these things into account. And when you're talking about young people, a lot of times they won't identify some of these things. And it's like pulling teeth. You just kind of have to get it out of them. But once they find out that you're an ally, I think it's going to be a lot easier for them to not come out to you, but to tell you things that are going on with them. And also with young people, they're questioning a whole lot of what they're going through. Their bodies are changing, their mental processes are changing. So you just have to be cognizant of the fact that a lot of these may come into play, and just be prepared to deal with it if you can. Now, this slide was actually given to me by somebody I had partnered with, and this was from the corporate world. I'm not going to mention who they are, but they own big supermarket chains. So, but this is what they came up with because they wanted to do a pride presentation and they wanted to be as inclusive as possible. So they came up with the LGBTQIAAP chart, or whatever you want to call this, which is, of course, L is for lesbian, G is for gay, B for bisexual, T is for transgender. They also used a T for transsexual. And transsexual is a term that I actually can't stand. I hate it. I don't use it because when you're dealing with the trans community, it's not really their sex or their sexual organ that defines them. It's who they think they are, and they define themselves. So, if you're identify with a woman, if you identify as a woman, and you still have a penis, but you know, that's in your world, you are a woman, you know, that penis does not define you. Okay. So I just don't like transsexual, and a lot of people still use it, but I don't. Q is for queer and or questioning. Remember, queer when I was growing when I was growing up was a detrimental term. I mean, you didn't want to be called a queer, but with the sexual revolution and gay pride and things like that, the gay revolution, we took back queer. Now people are proud to say, yeah, I am queer. A Q is for questioning, because there are people still who are not comfortable or haven't really defined where they're going. So they are still questioning. Intersex, as we talked about earlier, is somebody who's born with dubious genitalia. They could have both, or you know, both, and it's what the doctor decides to either cut one off or sew it up, and that's how you become a male or a female, or that's how you're assigned. But there are people who are living as intersex people. The A for ally, of course, these are people who are, you know, are cool with the gay community or the LGBTQ community, and they are allies. An ally can be is not just a noun; it's also a verb. You can show that you're an ally by the actions that you do, what you say about people. This is what makes you an ally. A is for asexual also, and that's, there are people who just don't have sex. They don't need sex, and they don't identify as straight or gay or anything like that. They're just asexual, which is cool. And then there's pansexual, of course, which means that you'll have fun with anybody. You know. Okay, so this is a glossary. And we can go over a few of these, but I believe that either Reggie or myself can put that glossary in the chat. We do have it as a PDF, so all of these terms and some more are going to be in the glossary. But so an ally, of course, a non-lesbian, gay, or bisexual whose attitudes and behavior work towards combating homophobia and heterosexism. Bi-curious, a person who's curious about their degree of bisexuality. Bisexual, a person who is sexually attracted to both men and women, or to a set of qualities that do not necessarily line up with biological sex. Cisgender person is a person who is not transgender. That is a person whose gender identity and assigned sex is the same. Everybody knows what coming out is. Down low, you don't hear that term too often anymore, but down low mostly referred to Black men. It came from the Black community, and they were men who discreetly have sex with other men while in sexual relationships with women, and they are said to be on the down low, meaning people don't know that they're gay or know that they're bisexual, but they're having sex with both men and women, but they're identifying as straight. Often these men do not consider themselves gay or bisexual. Dyke is a derogatory or slur for lesbians. Actually, it too was reclaimed by some as a term of pride. I know the New York Pride Parade used to always begin with dykes on bikes. So, you know, so lesbians did take that term back and to use as a positive thing. F to M is female to male, transgender, gay, of course. Gender identity, we talked about. Gender nonconforming, or people whose gender expression is different from what society expects for a male or female. Gender affirmation or transition. And that's the period in which a trans person transitions from one gender to another and affirms their gender identity. Now, even this term is being kind of updated, and people are asking us to use the term gender care as opposed to affirmation. Then there's heterosexual privilege, and those the benefits granted automatically to heterosexual people that are denied to gay men and lesbians. Then you've got your gender affirming procedures. These are hormonal, surgical, or other medical procedures that are used to help to affirm, or again, that term affirm is being kind of weaned out, because you can't really affirm somebody. They affirm themselves, but that's what we're stuck with at the moment. Surgical procedures may also be referred to as gender confirmation surgeries, sex assignment, and gender reassignment surgeries. Homophobia, of course, is fear and hatred of LGBT individuals. Internalized homophobia, and that's the process by which a member of the LGBT community comes to accept and live out inaccurate, disparaging myths and stereotypes about LGBT persons. In other words, they're not really comfortable about who they are, and their actions are, not very positive, and it's expressed some degree of homophobia. But you're a gay person and you're putting this on yourself. Lesbian, of course, woman who has emotional, social, physical, psychological, and physical commitments and responses to other women. Male to female trans persons, outing. Queer, of course, we talked about questioning. Sexual orientation or identity. And then transgender refers to people whose gender identity is not the same as their sex assigned at birth. Now, also when we're talking about young people, changing the subject really quickly, this was a study was done by Fenway Health in Boston, and it talks about the unhealthy impact of bullying on LGBTQ youth. And as you can see, bullying also leads to violence. 81.9% of students who identify as LGBTQ were bullied in the last years based on their sexual orientation. 63.5% of students feel unsafe because of their sexual orientation. 31.8% of LGBTQ students missed at least one entire day of school in the past month because they felt unsafe or uncomfortable in schools. And peer victimization of all youth was less likely to occur in schools with bullying policies that are inclusive of LGBTQ students. As you can see there on the chart there, 71.3% of students hear homophobic remarks like dyke or faggot often or frequently. 8 out of 10 students have been verbally harassed, and 4 of 10 have been physically harassed at school. Sexual minorities of youth are at increased risk for smoking, dating violence, and suicide attempts. And 40% of homeless youth are LGBTQ, and the number one cause of LGBT youth homelessness is family rejection or orientation or gender identity. And 54% of all cases of HIV among young people, persons aged 13 to 24 during a certain period were from male to male sexual contact. And then there's derogatory and terms that you should not ever use. Did I say ever, never, ever? Okay, deceptive, fooling, posing, or masquerading as a woman, using the term tranny with a Y or even an IE, a she-male, he, she, which I've heard on who was it? Judge Mathis actually referred to somebody as a he, she, and I was like so pissed. Referring to somebody as an int or a gender bender. When it comes to transgender people, do not say transgenders or that a person is transgendered. Somebody doesn't become transgendered. They are transgender. Think of it as like a color. He is purple, she is purple. He is transgender or she is transgender, not transgendered. Sex change, preoperative, postoperative. These are old terms that were used way back in the 50s and the 60s that we don't use them anymore. And the term hermaphrodite actually is intersex. So that was a term that was used way back when, even before I was a little boy. Now, when you talk about schools, keep in mind Title IX, which is also called the Patsy Takamoto Mink Equal Opportunity in Education Act. And it was signed in 1972 and signed into law. And it states that no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. And in 2002, following the death of its co-author, it was officially renamed the Patsy Takamoto Mink Equal Opportunity Act. So basically, this is referring to school, and that the schools cannot deny persons for participating, like especially like in sports things, because of how they identify. Now, of course, these days you got states that are like, well, you'll see in a minute. And this is the Equality Act, which was actually signed into law in the House, but I don't think the Senate has passed the Equality Act. But when it comes into play, this bill prohibits discrimination based on sex, sexual orientation, and gender identities in areas including public accommodations and facilities, education, federal funding, employment, housing, credit, the jury system. Specifically, the bill defines and includes sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity among the prohibited categories of discrimination or segregation. The bill expands the definition of public accommodations to include places of this or establishments that provide exhibitions, recreations, exercise, amusement, gatherings, or displays, goods, services, or programs, and transportation services. The bill also allows the Department of Justice to intervene in equal protection actions in federal court on account of sexual orientation or gender identity. And the bill also prohibits an individual from being denied access to shared facilities, including restrooms, locker rooms, and dressing rooms. And that is in accordance with the individual's gender identity. Now, I know that this group also got a presentation from GLSEN. And I am so happy that y'all had this before. So there's a lot of stuff that I borrow, and I say that loosely, borrow from GLSEN because of what the studies that they do and the people that they are. They've come out some really, really good stuff. And you can download this 2019 National School Climate Survey. You can go to the glisten.org website and you can download this. But some of the stats that I pulled from it, nearly 6 in 10 or 59.1% of LGBTQ plus students report having experienced discriminatory policies in school. This includes being prevented from using their chosen names and correct pronouns, using bathrooms or other facilities aligned with their gender identity, discussing or writing about LGBTQ plus topics, and forming peer support networks such as GSAs, gay straight alliances, or gender and sexuality alliances. Excuse me. It also includes being disciplined for public displays of affection for which non-LGBTQ students are not disciplined. Now, this little map here shows that really only like 16 or 17 states actually have laws prohibiting discrimination against students based on sexual orientation and gender identity without addition. And some states go a little further than other states. As you can see, New Jersey is in the orange right down there. And those are states with non-discrimination laws prohibiting discrimination against students on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, statutory language, and or state agency regulations on the treatment of transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming students. And as you can see, most of the states in the United States still don't have laws preventing discrimination. And those are the ones in the gray area, which, as you can see, really covers this country. So we got a lot of work to do, folks, trying to get the rest of the country up to speed. Findings from the GLSEN 2019 National School Climate Survey demonstrates that New Jersey schools are not safe for most lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer students, secondary school students. The vast majority of LGBTQ students in New Jersey regularly, sometimes, often, or frequently heard anti-LGBTQ remarks, and some also regularly heard school staff make homophobic remarks, that's 11% of the students, and negative remarks about someone's gender expression, 26%. Most LGBTQ students in New Jersey have experienced anti-LGBT victimization at schools. They also experience victimization at school based on disability, 31%, race, ethnicity, 20%, and religion, 15%. Most never reported the incident to school staff. Only about 35% of LGBTQ students who have reported incidents said it resulted in effective staff interventions. In New Jersey, 19% of LGBTQ students and nearly half of transgender students were unable to use the school bathroom aligned with their gender. And additionally, 12% of LGBTQ students in New Jersey and nearly a third of transgender students were prevented from using their chosen name or their pronouns in school.
Hi, Gary.
Yes.
Gary, we have a question in the chat. Someone asked about if you could talk a little bit more about chosen names more fully. This person works in a middle school, and again, how to approach that topic.
Okay. Well, first of all, people like to be chosen people like to be called what they would like to be called, right? You know, a lot of people go to school and they have nicknames, and I know you're supposed to use your legal name, but a lot of kids don't have the opportunity to have name changes, which we can talk about in half a second. So they're kind of stuck. But my advice to any teacher or administrator who comes across this is to address the students as they wish to be addressed. Now, a lot of times the parents aren't happy about this. And you know what? Don't tell the parents, okay? I'm not telling you to be bad and disavow what a parent wants to call their students. But if you're in school and a student wants to be called by a certain name, go ahead and use that name. It's not going to hurt the kid. Also, it might empower them. Also, another thing that happens if, and I should do this more often, is when you introduce yourselves, you should also use your own pronouns, and that'll cause kids to want to speak up and use their own pronouns. So I don't know legally if schools are allowed to let students use their name, use whatever name they choose. But I think if you're going to be a good administrator or a good teacher, ask your children ask the kids what they want to be, called. I see somebody else has raised their hand. Margaret Ryan.
They're just there's just another comment saying that it becomes difficult when the parents ask you not to use the name. So Gary, if I could give your voice a rest here for a second, because this is a great concern for a lot of folks. But I think one thing to remember is if your district does not have a policy around this, then that kind of again leaves that district up to the confusion that you are that you might be experiencing. So again, a district sometimes can sort of get ahead of some of these things by creating a policy that says, this or that. And like Gary was mentioning, and like the teachers in the chat are saying, that a lot of times parents' views are going to be oppositional to those of the youth, and that could sort of end up having the school sort of seemingly be caught in the middle. So again, creating a policy would most likely be the best route to take. It doesn't mean it's going to be not met with any sort of flack or any sort of kickback. So again, the school would probably be taking the temperature, if you will, of the room when they start discussing a policy of this nature, and that might inform, which way the policy ends up looking like, right? But that is definitely something that a lot of schools are grappling with. And again, if a school does not create a policy to address this, it kind of leaves it up to to that confusion that we're feeling.
Yeah, yep. And listen, this is what all the things that I'm telling you, this is what we discovered in my agency. And keep in mind that my agency is a social services agency. We're not a school, and we're basically, here for healthcare. But I can get away with a lot more than, say, a school can. So I don't want to get anybody fired. So I mean, if I'm giving you some information, don't go to your principal and say, well, Gary Paul said this, because I'm not a lawyer. I can't get you out of jail. I can't help you there, but I can give you some insight on what we've learned as a community-based organization. So listen to Reggie on this one, okay? He knows what he's talking about. So as I'm kind of winding it down, remember the poster that we saw in the first part of the presentation? Well, this is the same woman. This was taken 10 years after the first picture, and I actually got to meet her. So they kind of updated this. But once again, this is her natural body, and she didn't pay for all these things. But it makes for a great poster, and it makes good for a great conversation. And once again, her name is Jordan, and she just and that's her entertainment name, and she's just really a super duper person. But in your own spaces, create visible markers of support throughout your agency or office, such as trans-affirming posters, literature, brochures, or stickers. You'd be surprised what a little rainbow, a little rainbow in your classroom, what a joy that would be to a person who's LGBT and not necessarily out of the closet. But if they see a little rainbow over there in the corner, on the bulletin board, they're gonna feel a little bit more welcome than not. And you should also create an environment where derogatory language or jokes about trans people or LGBTQ people is not tolerated. And if you hear something, please say something. That's the only way it's going to come out into the light. Also, modify documents for students and for staff where gender or sex is required to include identities across the gender spectrum. Okay, and that's just as easy as saying, do you identify as male, female, or other? And then they can define what they want. But don't just leave it as a binary. Learning about other agencies and providers that offer LGBT affirming services before making referrals. Now, if you know somebody is not going to treat gay LGBT people correctly, don't refer them. Don't refer your students, anybody, to those people. Identify the places that you should or should not refer LGBTQ students or clients, and modify any referral list to reflect this information and pass it along to all staff. In other words, if you find out that X, Y, and Z clinic is like really bad for an LGBT student, tell people that I mean, everybody that you're involved with, don't send students to this place. They're not good people. You know how to handle that. I mean, there are a lot of places that already that are probably homophobic, transphobic, and you just wouldn't want to send your kids to these places. And do not out someone as gay or transgender unless it is necessary or, quote, in the line of duty. Because even if somebody is out to you, they may not be out to everybody else, and be cognizant of legal issues. You don't want to. I will say that a lot of our kids have gotten in trouble, and it's not all about sex work and things like that. And unfortunately, they've had to use their legal name because they have not legally changed their name. So sometimes it's important, or sometimes it's necessary to use their legal name. But in most cases, use the name that they're giving you. Part of the gender affirming processes, instead of using the term transition, use the term gender care, because that's basically what it is. And this may involve name and pronoun changes, hairstyle and clothing changes, gender affirming hormone therapy, gender affirming surgeries, or changes in their voice. And I believe Dr. Finkel is going to probably have a lot more information on this than I could possibly throw at you. So stay tuned for that. And finally, if your office, agency, or practice really wants to be culturally competent, when possible, ensure that at least one single stall gender neutral restroom is available, and allow people to use whichever bathroom they choose. I know a lot of hotels, when I go to conferences and things, are now having gender inclusive or gender affirming bathrooms. And a lot of women don't want to go to the bathroom with the men, and men don't want to go in the bathroom with women. So there are gender neutral bathrooms. But go to the bathroom that you choose. Don't be afraid. And I think that's it. We got time for questions and answers. I do want to acknowledge the New Jersey Department of Health, Center of Excellence for Transgender Health at the University of California at San Francisco, Fenway Health, the FXB Center at Rutgers School of Nursing, Sam Laurie, who's a transgender trainer, National Center for Transgender Equality, and the NCHHSTP, which I'm not going to even try to tell you what that is. Affirmative Services for Transgender Gender Diverse People, National LGBT Health Education Center at Fenway Institute, GLSEN, Transgender Queer Students in Your School, and Creating a Self and Welcoming Environment, Madeline B. Daniels, and so on and so forth. So that's it. That's what I got. I don't know how we're doing for time, but
awesome, Gary.
Okay.
Thank you so much. We did have some comments and some resources posted in the chat. Okay. Henry Young put in the chat again, transgender student guidance for school districts. So it's a great PDF. If you don't know about it, please take the chance to download it. Some people echoing your sentiment that GLSEN is an awesome organization. Tina in the chat is talking about, again, it is a state law that students can use their chosen name, right? And again, that is true. But enforcing that, or rather having it become best practice in every district, is still a challenge that schools are experiencing. So we're seeing that. Margaret was saying how, again, their school does have a policy, but again, it's different. It keeps changing, and there's a struggle with kids wanting to be called random names of animals and so on. So, how do you know when they're being serious, right? So if there are any other questions, please put them in the chat. Thank you so much, GPW, Gary Paul Wright. Yay. From the AAOGC. And before we hear from Dr. Finkel, I'm going to share a few slides that are focusing in on, and again, you can keep putting questions into the chat for Gary or myself, or for the panelists. I'm going to focus in on Aaron DeVore's transgender identity development theory. And one of the reasons why we kind of want to just take a look at this is because again, in your work as a counselor, as a school an educator, right, a social worker, you may meet a youth, you may meet an individual that is, again, appearing and reappearing in front of you, presenting themselves differently, right, than the time before, and so on and so forth. And again, I think by having this framing that was created by, I guess it is Dr. DeVore, it can be helpful or beneficial to sort of those experiences that you may have when you have a youth or a student that is presenting and again trying to figure out things for themselves. So right now I just want to share these slides because I know we want to have time for questions for Dr. Finkel, showing up in about 20 minutes. So hopefully everyone can see my screen. Hold on, I'm just going to stop sharing real quickly. And again, we're going to take a look at the 14 steps, if you will, of the transgender identity development, right? And again, over the next several slides, we'll just explore the journey that some trans-identified folks may experience as they engage in their journey of self-discovery and understanding and acceptance, right? This is Aaron DeVore, and again, award-winning teacher, fellow of the Society for Teaching and Learning Higher Education. Again, a member of the Academy and National Academy of Sex Research, fellow in the Society for Scientific Study of Sexuality, and again, an out trans person, and former Dean of Graduate Studies, and professor of sociology, University of British Columbia. So some of the things that we want to consider here, as we just check out these slides for the next couple minutes, is attitudes and skills and knowledge, right? The ask model, right? What attitudes do we or I hold as a provider working with LGBTQ plus youth? And also on the flip side, what attitudes do LGBTQ plus youth possess about themselves, right? And the situations and that they're experiencing. Do I have the requisite skills to work with this population? And what skills do LGBTQ plus youth bring with them into our learning or therapeutic spaces, right? What are their strengths, right? We always really want to sort of be strength-based, right? With the interactions we have with young folks, definitely. And what knowledge do I possess about LGBTQ youth and their needs, right? And what knowledge do I have as an LGBTQ identified youth myself, right? So those are things that we really want to sort of keep in mind and sort of ruminate about when we are working with this group, right? Now, again, within stage one, there's going to be some type of abiding anxiety that, and again, this is all according to DeVore, that folks might feel, meaning that they may be, again, experiencing anxiety and they're not really sure what it's about, right? They're not really sure how to sort of go about this. Oh, excuse me, I have to stop sharing for 1 second. And there we go. And again, within that stage, there's just, again, that anxiety, and they're just not really sure what it could be from, right? As that individual progresses, they might find themselves in stage two, according to Aaron DeVore, where there's identity confusion about the originally assigned sex and gender, right? Again, the anxiety is now turning into confusion. And as Gary Paul mentioned earlier, that sex is assigned at birth based on a visual examination of the genitalia, right? And again, if someone is presenting male, right, with genitalia, then they're going to be assigned that. If someone is presenting female genitalia, then they would be assigned that. If someone's genitalia is ambiguous, or if they have what's known as perhaps a DSD, a disorder of sexual development, then that person or that individual could literally, as we've been talking about, more factual, be assigned a sex, right, through a surgical procedure. So there can be plenty of room for anxiety and confusion around this. So then what an individual may find themselves doing is having identity comparisons, right, about originally assigned gender and sex, right, comparing identities, the ones that they are seeing out there in society and the one that they are themselves developing into or not developing into, right? And this can again be very frustrating. It can have a person presenting as a little bit of an angry person or maybe depressed, right? Because of these experiences that they're going through internally in these stages. So I just wanted to put this sign here because in the next couple of slides, DeVore uses the term transsexual or transgender interchangeably. And again, as Gary mentioned from AOGC in the previous segment, that's really not the language that is used currently, and it's not affirming language, it's not caring language as by our standards today. So I did want to put that this sort of disclaimer out there that the next several slides are indeed in DeVore's own language, but not necessarily the language that we would be using today, but also again, just really trying to frame the sort of the backstory that a trans identified youth might be experiencing as they develop through these stages proposed by DeVore. So stage 4 is discovery of, as I said earlier, the term used by DeVore, transsexualism or transgenderism. So this is again a point of the identity development that can be very invigorating to folks when they discover that there is this whole world out there, this whole transgender world that they perhaps never knew existed before. Now, again, with the advent of the internet, and again, it's, you know, everyone's sort of born into it, it's much easier to find communities now, all types of communities. But again, this discovery process of finding a community of like-minded and experienced folks is very liberating, and can also at the same time be stressful and be continuing to sort of increase that anxiety about what to do now. And there is still more confusion, right, about the this new discovery of transgenderism as a thing, right, as a possible identity or way of being. So it's really, again, according to DeVore, and when I first discovered this model or this theory, I was like, wow, 14 steps is a lot. But when you see it, when you go through it, it really seems to make sense. And remember, this is usually happening, well, this is definitely happening along the lines of all other types of development that are also going on within the youth. Further comparisons are going to be made about what, again, the identity of a transgender person is to the identity of, let's say, a cisgender person or straight hetero person, right? These comparisons continue. And that's why DeVore's model, it's coined, or the two phrases in it are mirroring and visioning, right? Mirroring and visioning within the transgender identity development, right? Mirroring meaning that when the individual goes to the mirror is reflective of the identity that they feel is who they are, right? So it's reflective of this internal, there's this internal and external congruence that they're experiencing. And visioning, in DeVore's words, means that other folks other than the transgender individual themselves are viewing, right, you in the way that you want to be viewed. So they are seeing you for who you want to be seen as, right? And there's no sort of confusion. So this stage is what's happening there with the comparisons of how these identities sort of play out or could potentially play out. So within stage 7, tolerance is the language being used of the transsexual transgender identity, is another way of, again, is a step before acceptance, if you will. And tolerance meaning that there is a little bit of letting go of a previously held identity, right? Or it's starting to become more acceptable to actually accept and be the transgender identity, right? So this stage, again, can have a lot of the same feelings where there might be a little bit of discomfort of letting go of the older identity and starting to lean towards the newer transgender adoption of this identity. Within stage 8, the delay before acceptance, right? It's important to understand that, again, this may not be for some folks, the delay could be as short or as brief as once they've discovered that there is a transgender identity possibility in their world, right? The discovery, right? That stage. And then there could be a period of delay after the comparisons have been made with other identities. And that period for folks can be shorter or longer. The delay for one trans individual could be a month or 5 months. Whereas for another person, it could be 50 years. It could be 30 years. It could be 7 years, right? So the delay before acceptance, this is a somewhat critical stage, according to DeVore, because this delay can be somewhat significant or insignificant. And it really does sort of depend on other things that are going on within the individual. And Gary mentioned it earlier in our talk that intersectionality, right? For some folks, the delay might be caused because of deep religious holdings. For others, it could be because of deep cultural beliefs about transgender, right? And that can impact how long the delay is or not, right? Stage 9 is acceptance, right? Stage 9 is acceptance. And prior to this, you had, again, all of the confusion, the discovery, right? The delaying. And after the delay, and again, that delay period can be as long or as short for some folks, there is this feeling or this stage of acceptance where the transgender identity is being accepted and embraced by that individual after the discovery, after the comparisons, right? And after the delay, there is the stage of acceptance. So another delay occurs because before the delay before accepting the transgender identity, now there is a separate delay before a transition. Whereas the delay we experienced, I believe it was stage 8, was based on the identity and being able to internally accept this new reality. Now this delay in stage 10 is about the transition. So this would be more about identity expression, right? Before you become that identity in the outside world. Stage 11 is transition itself, which, again, as we talked about earlier, can be as simple as, like Gary mentioned earlier, having a bag with all of your makeup and all of your clothing that you need to facilitate the transition to the gender that you feel like expressing at the moment, like Gary Paul was talking about earlier, with some of the youth that he worked with in Newark showing up with their bags and arriving presenting as males, and then again feeling safe enough in their space, in his presence, to be able to transition to their female expression and feel comfortable doing that, right? So stage 11 is about that transition. And again, it doesn't have to be surgery. It doesn't have to be anything other than being able to express it in the way that that individual feels is causing the sort of connect between their identity experience and their identity expression and the outside world. With stage 12, you have acceptance of the post-transition gender slash sex identity, right? And again, what this means is there is internal and external, if you will, congruence about how your identity is internally to you and how it is also being mirrored, or rather visioned, in the outside world by others, right? So there's acceptance of this. There is a general feeling of arrival, if you will, but again, it's more about being able to accept that this is the new me and this is the new reality of how I will be living my life from now on. And integration is a further step and extension of that acceptance level, where this identity is being integrated into all facets and all aspects of an individual's life, and they are again sort of fully fusing this newly developed, or rather accepted identity, right, into all aspects of their work life, their school life, you could say, their home life, their family life. All of that has been integrated and fused together, which leads you to, again, the final stage, according to Aaron DeVore. And this it's ironic because this is the stage that we usually hear about, right? This stage is pride, right? Pride in arriving at this fusion, if you will, of having the internal identity matching the external persona or identity that is being recognized by all in the world that you interact with, right? It creates this feeling, this sense of pride, because again, it was a journey. We've been talking about 14 steps, and these steps can take, again, 1 year to 50 years. It depends on, again, what other identities, what other factors are being experienced in an individual's life. I just think it's, again, really interesting that pride is really what we focus in on. But the journey to pride is sort of a long one and arduous, especially if young folks do not have the support that they need, right? And don't have the sort of infrastructure, whether it be at school or at home or in their religious communities, to be able to experience all these stages and come out to this feeling of pride, right? Earlier, GPW talked about the genderbread person, so we won't look at that, but I did want to talk, or just show the slide about the gender unicorn, which is, again, just a different way, but another way to sort of explicate, and in a pictorial sort of sense, the fluidity of identity, of gender identity, gender expression, right? And the difference between sex assigned at birth and sexual orientation, which is the bottom part where you're looking at physically attracted to, emotionally attracted to. So those are other things that another way that we could look at gender, right, through the unicorn lens, if you will. Some resources for folks working with transgender youth. There's quite a bit out there. Obviously, Gary Paul Wright's organization, the AAOGC, based out of Newark, is a great resource for folks. But we also have High Tops in Princeton, right? We have the Hetrick Martin Institute, right? They have New York and New Jersey offices. The Institute for Personal Growth is a great resource right in Highland Park. The Family Acceptance Project out in San Francisco is a great resource to familiarize yourself with. The Trevor Project is all about being really accessible in the way that young people like to be accessible virtually and over the phone, right? Through text and chat rooms. And then you have The Door, which is based in New York City area, but again has a very strong virtual presence that young people, especially transgender folks, are really excited about and use. And lastly but not least, we have Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital, and again sort of Rutgers University in general, through their transgender health program, and other resources that are available to folks here locally and nationally, right? Any questions? I'm not looking at the chat, and that is letting you know sort of like the time of year we're at. Questions are my favorite. If there are any, please put them in the chat. And I'm not sure if Dr. Finkel is on yet. I can't see that, but there will be an evaluation at the end. So please make sure to give us your feedback about how we did, about the information you received, and the way it was delivered. Just want to, again, shout out these references. Aaron DeVore, it's pronounced metrosexual, transstudent.org, Vect Easy for some of the slides, and again, Tina O'Sullivan for also being of assistance. I see a question about identifiable gaps in resources for transgender students, and I'm just going to stop sharing there. And we'll open this up to the panel, but I will say that there are definitely identifiable gaps. Gary, do you want to speak to any of this?
Actually, there are probably more gaps than not. So I didn't get to see the question itself. So I'm not sure what you mean by identifiable. Oh, there's Diana Finkel is here.
Okay, Dr. Finkel is here. So Henry, could we bring Dr. Finkel onto the panel, please? I'm not sure how to do that. But I think I think as far as identifiable gaps in resources, it would be one that I know about for sure is housing. As far as just again, you saw the statistics that Gary was quoting earlier about how up to almost 40% of homeless youth are likely to be LGBTQ identified. And within that, it's easy to just say, LGBTQ. However, the T of it is really different in the sense of what their needs and specific resources available to them are. And I know for a fact that I was charged with helping identify some housing resources available specifically for trans youth. Right? Because again, a lot of us may be familiar with sending someone to, let's say, Covenant House, right? But for a trans youth, that may not be an ideal setup or scenario. So we have to sort of do a little bit more digging to really be able to help that young person out. So
can I throw in that also when it comes to employment, big gap. That's why a lot of the trans girls, especially when we started, had to do sex work because that's the only kind of work they could get. Now, myself, we've employed trans people since 2004. And a lot of the service agencies and community-based organizations will also hire trans people. But a lot of your corporate people, there's still a big gap there about how to employ and to do outreach to transgender people. So it's a big gap. That's a big one, yeah.
Okay, we're still trying to bring on Dr. Finkel, but there was another question in the chat about homeless youth and what's the age in which we don't have to contact a parent. And again, that what I can say is from my background with sexual reproductive health and advocacy, I know that again, emancipation can happen for a pregnant teenager. Right. So that doesn't change anything for the males or the male population. But that's a good question. And again, I don't have the answer for that one as far as homeless youth and contacting parent, because there were and there are different types. Here we are with Dr. Finkel is coming on. She might be able to answer this, but there are different types. And again, one of the issues is this homeless youth documented, undocumented, right? And where do they specifically like the age, right? Hi, Dr. Finkel. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I just want to again welcome you, Dr. Finkel, to the panel. And we have already shared our slides with Gary, Paul, and myself. And again, now we would just like to hear a little bit more about sort of, because we're getting a lot of questions about age and laws and parental involvement, and where does all of that fall into play. So if you could welcome, definitely, but if you could address some of those, I think that's beyond me and Gary's purview right now.
Hi all, thank you so much for inviting me, giving me the opportunity to speak. So I'm going to rephrase anything I say with the fact that I am an adult ID physician and an adult primary care physician, provide gender affirming care to people over the age of 16 with parental consent and 18 without. That being said, I'm privileged to be part of NJCRIs. I'm the clinical director of our primary care transgender program. So I am very much aware of the services they offer there for trans youth. So I could speak a little bit to that. So I saw questions in there about linkage for homelessness so Project WOW at NJCRI and Project T. Project T is Trans Empowerment Through Action. Those are two programs. Project WOW is for all LGBT 13 to 24-year-old folks, while Project T is specifically for trans individuals. And Ms. Imani Hayes is the project manager. I see Gary nodding. We all know Imani. Yes. So, and they also have 3 other staff members, of which Sid Rosen is the linkage navigator. So all their staff is trans identified, and they can work together with the Project WOW team to help assist with referrals for housing. My patients and the folks I see there, we've housed at Rain Foundation. I don't know if that's the most ideal place for everything on earth as well, but I've had kids stay there along with coming in house, and I agree with you, that might not be the most amazing thing. So we are fortunate as far as in New Jersey that we do have under the Rutgers umbrella, the Robert Wood Johnson folks. So Dr. Sari Benciana is my colleague who's a pediatrician and an adolescent specialist at Robert Wood Johnson. She used to be here and now she's there, and they provide both pediatric as well as adolescent gender affirming care as part of their program and routine peds care. So I don't know anybody else in this area who accepts like Medicaid or, things like that for kids and adolescents for this sort of care. We, like I said, we would have taken people younger than 16 if they were already on hormones from elsewhere, like usually they'll be on blockers. But generally we start with 16 with parental consent in our area, as far as medical treatment is. But as far as linkages to care and support, the resources you put up, I took a picture of your slide too about the Trevor Project and all the other and Heinrich Martin, that they're great resources as well. And I generally will send them to Project T. We will hopefully eventually have safe space for the kids as well. And by children, I mean under the age of 16, 14 to younger kids here in Newark as well. So 9 was a little young for me. We just got a referral for 9-year-old. I felt that was way out of our jurisdiction. So I do know for us in New Jersey, it's 16 with parental consent, but I do know other people who've started hormones on kids younger than that, or at least blockers with parental consent, far younger than that right before puberty.
And thank you for sharing that. And some people had questions about as far as the puberty blockers and whether or not they are reversible. So could you speak to that? I have to air quote reversible because a lot of people want that.
So, I mean, it is reversible in effect that if you stop it, then the child will then go through puberty. When they put them on puberty blockers, that just, they will still grow, that delays development of secondary sex characteristics. You don't want to stay on that forever as well, though, because of some bone health issues and other issues that might develop with that. But it is reversible, quote unquote, to an extent in terms of puberty, but it's not going to reverse growth or things like that. Awesome. I'm putting into the chat a link as a site that was developed here at Rutgers, NJMS for both community members and providers and medical students and other medical trainees, as well as resources for for working with and referring gender diverse people. And we will have some PEDS linkages of that as well in terms of support groups. And also, if you keep, look at it later, we'll also be putting in linkages for Spanish and Portuguese language support groups for parents, as well as, kids, and information on that. GLAAD, GLAAD has, the national organization has resources in Spanish as well for family members.
Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Finkel, can you speak to the cultural influences that might impact the types of clients that you see, in the sense of because what we're seeing a lot is, as people working with youth, people working with DCF or working with CMO, is that there seems to be a disconnect between what parents want and what the what the transgender youth is wanting. And is it a lot of times because of culture, or is it because the parents just don't understand? Could you speak at all to that in what you've seen in your work?
Well, I mean, I think parents and kids sometimes want the same thing, right? They want their child to be happy, and the parents want to be happy and the child wants to be happy. Gender diversity is for many parents, not something they really thought about when they had their child, nothing they're familiar with. There's societal and social taboos, sometimes a religious issue in terms of maybe faith-based associated stigma in some cultures about gender diversity and LGBTQ issues in general, and in others not. We can only speak about, what we know here. It might be different in other places, other countries, other cultures. So I think the work that we do and the studies we've done and the work that's been published shows that the number one protective feature for a gender diverse child for suicidality as well as depression and anxiety is family support and acceptance. So the family, the key thing for all of us is to have slowly educate the family. It might not end the child and try to help them remain together and have support, for the kid during this whole process, because the statistics you quoted about 40% LGBT, youth who are homeless identify LGBTQ. It is much higher in trans than here in Newark. We did a recent small study, pilot study, and 19% of our trans kids were homeless, and 34% were housing insecure, and 66% of all of the individuals we surveyed, and our average age was like 29, but many of the people were under the age of 25. 66% of them were food insecure. So these are numbers that 50 to 60%, 66%. And of those, over 65% were living in poverty, so below 20,000, the federal poverty level. So basically, the social determinants of health that are low in the general Newark and population are 3 to 4 times worse in people, especially youth that identify as trans. So if the family and the child do not quite mean, and the thing is, like I said, to me, we emphasize the fact that they do want the same thing. They want the child to be happy. You want to support your child. What that means and when you will come to that is something we can all help them grow together with. But the key would be to try to encourage support. So I come to it from a place of, well, I'm glad you're here together, and I'm glad that you're here and that you're here to support your child and you want to understand a little bit more. I mean, kids also don't know, they might want hormones right away or that sort of thing right away. And it could be like a process, you have a lifetime. I know that, gender incongruence and dysphoria could be very traumatizing to an adolescent, but you want to think about this. You want to make sure that everything is done safely, that they have a place to be, having hormones and, having no place to live or to keep them and nothing to eat, that's not helpful. So I come to it from a place that we're here. Number one thing you could be doing for your child is what you're doing now, and coming here together to hear about this and to be there.
Exactly. That's so true. The lack of family support, and we see it in a bunch of other aspects, not just within the sexuality sphere. The lack of family support can really crumble a child's ability to develop in a healthy and a productive manner. So I guess because we do have you here, so I definitely want to pick your brain and figure out and sort of speak for the audience gathered today, in the sense of asking questions that they might be thinking of and just don't want to type. I want to address the elephant in the room of the cost. Are there any costs associated? Because in CMO world, there's a lot of there's a lot of state funding, there's a lot of support for the work that we do with families. So on this front, with regard to transgender identity development or transgender care, what does that look like for families? Is it what does that look like?
So there's a lot of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there is a lot of deficit in providing Medicaid funded affordable mental health and case management and support services, which are not medical for youth in this area. It's very difficult to find a gender affirming Medicaid accepting psychologist or psychiatrist or a licensed clinical social worker. So those kind of programs are few and far in between. I have difficulty referring people for that kind of care. For people who are either unable to pay or don't even have or have Medicaid, or and so that's definitely a big deficit and something we desperately need in this area. That being said, so as far as if you do get in there and they do take Medicaid, I mean, they will do counseling, they will assess the child for gender dysphoria, gender incongruence, and they can provide letters of support for hormones. Now, as far as people who are 16 and up with parental consent, we don't do in like you don't have to sign a consent. You do an informed consent, or in a minor's case, a formed assent. So if the minor and the parent understand the risks and benefits, and in my case, if they're 18 and up and they understand what really is hormones will do, side effects, irreversibility, what it really means, and I feel that they are having seen enough people that they seem to have a true gender dysphoria, then we will usually start hormones within several visits. Many times people will come from letters of support from their therapist. That certainly speeds things up, because then, it's not necessary over an 18 for many of us. But for younger people, I think it is important that they would be with some, would have some counseling and therapy, especially if the kids on blockers, you could suppose they already, before they stop blockers, many of the endocrinologists do want them to also see a mental health person and things. So as far as paying for things, so hormones are covered by Medicaid, and so is gender affirming surgery, which nobody does on kids. Okay, so let's just, in any place, nobody does tops, bottom surgeries in children. So anybody who says, oh, nobody does that. So those are, and surgeons don't actually even want to do 16 to 17, because they don't feel things heal properly or things like that. So at least the surgeons in our area. So nobody's going to be doing that kind of surgery in a very young, probably anybody we're talking about. But those surgeries are covered by insurance as well. And to be able to, currently in this area, a lot of the insurance companies and the surgeons will go with the WPATH criteria. They'll need a letter of support from the primary physicians providing the therapy, as well as from a mental health person. And generally they want them for trans femme youth to be on hormones for about a year in this area, and trans masculine, not necessarily, not so much. They don't need to, because they don't even need to be on hormones really, but then they'll need letters of support for their top surgeries because of different issues associated with trans masculine youth and binding, and poor surgical outcomes for continued binding over the years than when they do reconstruction. So, but not everybody, only 25% of all trans individuals get any kind of surgeries or even any kind of hormones. Not everybody needs that. The majority might just be happy living their life as they are and require different things than surgery, But if you have to pay out of pocket, oral estrogen is not expensive. You can, it's probably about $30, $25 for the month. On GoodRx, you put in GoodRx and it'll give you a list of pharmacies. Testosterone is dirt cheap, sorry, but like people can't even, everybody has different, dirt cheap for me might not be dirt cheap for somebody, but you could probably get a month of testosterone legally with a prescription and all that for like $15 for a whole month. So those are not expensive. Patches, which are some of the more preferred things we might use, because you don't want to necessarily get an injection. They are more expensive. They're cost prohibitive, 200 plus, so both the estrogen as well as the testosterone patches and gels, intranasal testosterone, which is something else we can use. Those things are expensive, but, they are covered by insurance, even Medicaid, so that sort of thing is not as the actual Surgeries are covered by Medicaid, but if you have to pay out of pocket because you don't have insurance or you're on undocumented, that can be quite pricey.
Okay. Thank you so much, because that was a question put into the chat, talking about the medical care and the HRT services and insurance requirements, and you definitely covered that well. But you did use the term dysphoria, I think, right? Dysphoria. Now, so again, we have clinicians, LCSWs, and therapists on the call. So what is the, I guess, the divergence? Where does I would say typical transgender identity development and gender dysphoria, where do they split?
So they all know a lot more than me, right? Since that's their specialty. But so this gender dysphoria is a societally induced condition, right? So it develops in a person who is stigmatized, and it's societal pressure that makes them uncomfortable with their gender identity, gender incongruence. The individual does not feel that their gender aligns with what was assigned at birth. Now, gender dysphoria is a condition induced by us not accepting that this person is incongruent. So, and that is, a condition that therapists could provide support for and make the person feel better. Gender dysphoria can be treated with hormones, and it can be treated with surgeries, and that can improve. But like I said, gender incongruence is what you feel like, while gender dysphoria is induced by the stress of living with gender incongruence.
Yes, thank you for making that distinction, because again, for many it's conflated as synonymous, right? And it's really important to make that distinction, that it is something induced by the environment in which that person is experiencing their gender incongruence. And again, as you mentioned earlier, when you have a strong supportive base, whether it be in the home or in the general population in the world, whatever it is that any individual is experiencing tends to get better or not be an issue if it is supported in whatever way, right? So thank you so much for pointing that out. I see by the time we're almost done, so if there are any questions, please put them into the chat and ask away, whether it's for Gary Paul Wright of the African American Organization for Gay Concerns, Dr. Diana Finkel out of Rutgers, Newark, or myself here with Tri-County CMO. And there will be an evaluation just asking for your feedback about the process. And just in closing, I'm just going to go around to our panelists. I'll start with you, Gary, and see if you have any closing thoughts about, again, working with youth, LGBTQ plus identified, and what parting thoughts you'd have for us.
If anything, I really want to thank you, and I want to thank Dr. Finkel, especially Dr. Finkel, because I could talk about all the things that we witness in our little office, but it's people like you, the real doctors that treat these individuals, that I don't want to say that affirms them, because they affirm themselves. But so often the medical community is so helpful to people like me, you know what I mean? So I really want to thank you. I thought your presentation was wonderful. Reggie, I thought yours was wonderful. Like I say, if you want more information, call us at the African American Office of Gay Concerns, the AAOGC. And we just love partnering with University Hospital, NJCRI. You mentioned Imani, and they stole her from us, but that's another story. But she's wonderful. But thank you for all the work you're doing with the trans community. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And actually, I thank all of you, because you are all here in the field doing the work that needs to be done, and many of you walking in the steps of of the community that I'm trying to serve. My position's always been one of ally, so I can only hope that as time goes by, my services will not be necessary, as we would have trained more trans-identified healthcare workers, community support individuals, and CEOs to take our place. So I hope I become obsolete very soon. So that is our goal at JMS. So to keep training those who can walk in the same steps of the people we're trying to reach, because we can't build anything for people without actually engaging them and making the structures that we want to do. So not just our front desk staff, though as many staff members as we can who identify as trans, the better, but also our CEOs, our physicians, our nurse practitioners, our licensed clinical social workers, our community liaisons, our police officers, and our correctional staff, and everybody else should hopefully be members of the population we serve as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gary, Paul, and Dr. Finkel. I just want to chime in here and say a very big special thank you to Henry Young at the Somerset Office of Youth Services for spearheading this initiative and prioritizing this type of conversation and making sure that it's happening and that the information is being shared and not just being siloed with people like Gary and Dr. Finkel and myself, right? We want to all be out there and be able to have the desired positive impact on the lives of the young LGBTQ plus folks that we work with, go to school with, and again, live in the communities with. So definitely thank you, Somerset Office of Youth Services, and thank you to all our participants for being here. Do not forget to give us that feedback. It's not noon yet, so before you run away from this this machine that you've been latched to for the last 4 years, it feels like, right? Please give us that feedback. And again, I'll hand it over to you, Henry, and definitely thank you, Gretchen. Gary, you want to say something?
Yeah, just real quickly. I did put the glossary in the chat, the PDF, so that's there. And I also put my name and my email contact in the chat as well. So feel free to
Awesome. Thank you. I know Gretchen said she's going to be emailing it out because some people were having issues downloading it from the chat, but we are going to be emailing out the glossary to everyone. And this presentation was definitely recorded, so you can always refer back to it at your leisure. Henry?
You took the words right out of my mouth. I just want to thank everybody for coming. I do like to prioritize these types of conversations. I think this is definitely very, very important to have, especially now in our society, what's going on with everything. It's very, very important to make the lesser known stuff more widely accessible for people to have access to. And like Reggie said, this webinar was recorded. I will be uploading it to Somerset County's official YouTube page, and I will get it uploaded so that we can have it on our official youth services page for the county. And the resources that were presented today, like the PDFs and the websites and everybody's information, will be sent out with their certificates either today or Monday, depending on how fast we can get that done. And again, it would be very, very helpful to do the survey once you guys log out. It will pop right up once you close out the webinar, so that's easy enough for everybody right there. So if everyone's all good, I think that we can end this. That's all right with everybody. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Reg.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Dr. Finkel. Thank you, Henry and Gretchen.
Bye.
Have a great one, everyone.